don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And the reason that I wrote a chapter about that is because people who let their children do things that make them dislike them end up disliking them. And because there's a huge power differential, generally speaking, between adults and children, if you end up disliking your children because they're not behaving well, they're behaving disgracefully, say, or they're challenging your position in the authority hierarchy too regularly, something you won't put up with, by the way, even if you think you will. It's necessary to get your disciplinary routine straight. So the first thing I would say is figure out what the rules are. There shouldn't be too many. For 2-year-olds, basically, they have to know what no means, and they also have to learn, as they approach 3, not to kick, hit, bite, or steal, essentially. Now, it's easy to train a 2-year-old what no means. You can actually start with a child that's only 13 months old, a child that can cry, let's say that, or that can crawl. Let's say that you have a child that's starting to crawl and wants to explore the house. So the first thing you do, if you have any sense, is try to get rid of most things that the child could cause a tremendous amount of trouble with to the things or to the child, so that it's reasonably safe. And then the child is going to want to crawl around and get into everything. And so, but maybe there are things you don't want him or her to get into, like maybe there's what would we say? Maybe there's a tablecloth, and on top of the tablecloth there's a plant, or maybe there's some plants on the floor. And when the child is crawling and goes off to do something that he or she shouldn't, you can just grab his leg and, gently but firmly, and say no. And the child will keep trying to move forward because they're stubborn little blighters, and you can continue to say no. And if you persist with saying no, then the child will eventually give up and sort of go limp. Now, and often the child will cry when you do that. And of course that might make you feel guilty, but what that means is that you've effectively brought the behavior to a halt. And if you do that 10 times, you got to watch your child, and don't stop them from exploring things that they need to explore. And you want to use this sort of thing with judiciously. You can grab them by the leg and say no, and no, and wait until they give up. Usually they'll cry, and then you can let them go. And then soon, after you do that about 10 times, soon then, if you just say no with the same tone of voice, the child will, generally what happens, the child will immediately cry and then stop. And then after about 10 repeats of no without having the leg grabbed, then no will just produce stopping of the behavior. And that's unbelievably useful, because as soon as you train your child to understand what no means, then they really have free reign of the house in some sense, with relative minimal supervision from you. First of all, they can learn what things they're not supposed to get into, and it's amazing how fast children can learn that, and how fast they can generalize to the class of things that they shouldn't get into. Like, you don't have to teach them every single thing. They can generalize very rapidly. That's not much different than thinking. But also, once they are capable of understanding what no means, you have an extremely potent means of helping them regulate their behavior with a minimum of intervention. So that's unbelievably useful. So now let's say you have a 2-year-old who's pretty contentious, and 2-year-olds are pretty contentious, some of them in particular, because about 5% of 2-year-olds, most of them are male, are quite aggressive by temperament. And those are the ones that, if you put with other 2-year-olds, will frequently kick, hit, bite, or steal. Not all kids are like that, but some are. And most of them get socialized out of that by the time they're about 4. Now let's say you have, and at 2 they also start to experiment with saying no back, and also with misbehaving, although they can do that even younger than that. So if you have a 2-year-old who's particularly rambunctious and who decides he isn't going to listen to you, we'll use he in this example because it's boys that are more likely to misbehave and not listen. You can pick them up and, by the arms. Now, you got to get your attitude right, because you don't want to be stupid. You don't want to let your kid make you mad, especially when they're really little, because you're really big and you can hurt them. And so you gotta have a clue. That's why you want to get the rules of discipline in order, the minimum rules of discipline, and why you want to have a strategy. But let's say your two-year-old is insisting upon doing something that you don't want him to do, like inserting a fork into an electrical outlet, and you just can't have that. And so you can say no. Hopefully you've already done the no training that I recommended. And then if that doesn't work, what I recommend doing is picking the child up by the arms and then putting them on the steps. Say, look, you sit there until you're ready to listen. Now, usually the child will sit there, and then the rule has to be something like, you can get up as soon as you're ready to be a civilized human being again, and you can refer to yourself, your own attitude during a process like that, because if the child does comply and sits on the steps and then comes and says, I'm ready to be good, and you like him again, you got to be honest about this, then you can tell that he's honest in his decision to rejoin the civilized world. Now, sometimes if you put a 2-year-old that's particularly rambunctious on the staircase, then as soon as you let go of their arms, they'll run off. And that can be a game, or it can just be an act of defiance. And in that case, then you go get them and you put them back on the steps. And you do that several times if necessary. And if that becomes a game, then you sit on the step and you hold him by the arms. Remember, no anger, because he's just 2, for God's sake. You don't have to be angry. Just put him on the steps and hold him. Say, look, I'm not letting you go until you sit there and behave. And so if you hold him for a while, he'll squirm and look away and so forth. But you can get his attention if you're a little bit stubborn. You hold him there and say, you're going to sit there till I decide that you can leave. And so you hold him and he'll squirm, but you can outwait him if you're patient, but you got to make the time. And then eventually he'll stop squirming and you can let him go. And then you can sit there and watch him. And when you think he's, decided that he's going to be a civilized creature, then you can say, that's good, and you can give him a pat on the head, and you can say, let's go back and do what we're doing. And the rule has to be, you see, that the punishment not only has to bring the behavior to a halt in the most merciful manner possible, but that's still effective, but it also has to satisfy your need for order and justice so that you don't carry resentment and irritation about the child's misbehavior forward with you, because you don't want to kid yourself about what sort of nice person you are. You're not nearly as nice a person as you think, and no one likes to be brought down the authority hierarchy by a recalcitrant 2-year-old. So in almost all circumstances, those processes will suffice. There's other disciplinary strategies that you can use too that are more positive. I mean, one of the things that you can do, for example, if you're, let's say you want to get your child to go to bed, which is a really good idea. You should set a stable bedtime for your child. And I would say if they're under 4, it should be around 8 or 7 or something like that, because you want to have a life, and you want to have a life with your wife so that you don't end up hating your child. And so one of the things you can do, if you want to train your child to go to bed at 8, so maybe he's not going to bed until 10 right now, and you want to fix that. So you say, okay, go to the grocery store or a little convenience store and buy 10 little gifts. And they can be cheap. Kids don't care. They're not very bright, you can fool them. So buy 10 little things that you think your kid would like and wrap them up. And then put them up on a shelf where he can see them but can't get at them. And then you say, look, kid, I'm going to put you to bed at 9:30 tonight, and if you don't get out of bed, then I'm going to give you one of these gifts in the morning. So, or you can do it another way too. If the child is always giving you a rough time about getting ready for bed and going to bed, you can say, look, if you put on your pajamas without fussing and you climb into bed, then I'll give you one of these little gifts. And so then if that works, then the child can have a little gift and he's in bed at 9:30, and then you can make it 9, and then you can make it 8:30, and then you can make it 8. And that's called successive approximation, right? You hit the target. You specify the target that you want the child to achieve, and then you use small rewards, not too often, in order to attain that goal. And those are unbelievably effective strategies, and they can actually be pretty fun. But I would say the advice to not let your child do anything that makes you dislike them is really, really useful. You want to talk this over with your partner too, so that you have your disciplinary strategies and your rules talked out so that you don't work at cross purposes to one another. So I've been telling people online in various ways and in lectures that they should start fixing up the world by cleaning up their room, and I wanted to just elaborate on that a little bit before I get back to the lecture itself. So, as it's become this weird internet meme, and it's a joke, and good, it's a joke. I'm really happy about the fact that so much of this has got like the leaven of humor in it. It's really important, because that's what stops things from degenerating into conflict, humor. And I was thinking about this idea of cleaning up your room in relationship to the mustard seed idea. And you see, the thing about cleaning up your room, this is also something I learned from Carl Jung and his studies on alchemy, because for Jung, when the alchemist was attempting to make the philosopher's stone, he was not only engaged in the transformation of the material world, but he was engaged in a process of self-transformation that occurred at the same time as the chemical transformation. So it was a psychological work in some sense. Let's say you want to sort out your room and beautify it, because the beauty is also important. And let's say that all you have is just a little room, like you're not rich, you're poor. And you don't have any power, that's another thing. But you've got your damn room, and you've got this space right in front of you, you know, that's a part of the cosmos that you can come to grips with. And you might think, well, what's there in front of you, right in front of you? And the answer to that is, it depends on how open your eyes are. That's the proper answer, because you could say, and William Blake said this, for example, and Aldous Huxley made comments that were very similar, that in a transcendent state you can see infinity in the finite. And you might say, well, you can see infinity in what you have within your grasp if you look, and you could say maybe that's the case with your room. And so you want to clean up your room. Well, okay, how do you do that exactly? Well, a room is a place to sleep. And so if you set your room up properly, then you figure out how to sleep and when you should sleep and how you should sleep. And then you figure out when you should wake up. And then you figure out, well, what clothes you should wear, because they have to be arranged properly in your dresser. And then you have to have some place to put your clothes. And if you're going to have some clothes, you have to figure out what you're going to wear those clothes to do, right? And then that means you have to figure out what you're going to do. And then your room has to serve that purpose, because otherwise it isn't set up properly. And if it doesn't serve your purposes, you will be unhappy and not happy in the room, because the way that we perceive the world is as a place to move from point A to point B in. And then if the place that we're in facilitates that movement, then we're happy to be there. And if the place that we're in serves as an obstacle to that movement, then we're unhappy to be there. And so what it means to set up your room is that you have to have somewhere to go that's worthwhile, or you can't set up your room, and then your room has to be set up to facilitate that. And then the next thing is, well, maybe you have to make it beautiful. But that's not easy, right? That means you have to have some taste. And that doesn't mean you have to have money. It doesn't, because you can be garish with money, and you can be tasteful with nothing. All you need is taste, and taste beats money when it comes to beautifying things, you know? I mean, not that money is trivial, because it's not, but taste is crucial, and people who are very artistically oriented can make beautiful things out of virtually nothing. And not only that, the literature suggests that if you're going to make beautiful things, putting real constraints on what you allow yourself to do facilitates creativity instead of interfering with it. Because let's say you have to make something out of nothing, right? Which I suppose would be a godly act, right? You have to make something out of nothing. You have to be creative in order to do that. And so then to beautify your room means that you also have to develop your capacity to be creative. And so then you can make your room shine. But then what will happen is that if your family isn't together, they will interfere with that. You'll interfere with that because you won't have the discipline to do it properly. But then when you start building this little microcosm of perfection with what you have at hand, then it'll evoke all the pathologies of everyone in your household. They'll wonder what the hell you're up to in there. And they won't necessarily be happy, because if they're in a lowly place, let's say, and so are you, and you're trying to move out of that, then the higher you move out of that, the more the place they're in looks bad. And you might say, well, what they should do is celebrate your victory over chaos and evil, but that isn't what will happen. What will happen instead is that they will attempt to pull you back down. They'll attempt to, and I mean, obviously all families don't do that, but all families do that to some degree, and some families do almost nothing but that. And so what that means is that if you're going to organize your room, then you're going to have to confront the devils in your house, and that's often a terrifying thing, because some of those devils have lineages that go back many, many, many generations, and God only knows what you have to struggle with in order to overcome that. And so to sort yourself out and to fix up your room is a non-trivial matter, you know, and you can do that. You'll learn by doing that, and then maybe you'll learn enough by doing that so that you can fix up your family a little bit, and then having done that, you'll have enough character so that when you try to operate in the world at your job, or maybe in the broader social spheres,
that you'll be a force for good instead of harm, because you'll have learned some humility by noting just how difficult it was to put your damn room together, well, and yourself for that matter. And so you'll proceed cautiously with your eyes open towards the good.
All right, so what does the frame look like? Well, I think it looks something like this, and this is, as far as I can tell, this is the bare bones. This is the bare bones of a variety of things. It's a bare bones story. It's a bare bone conceptual framework. It's a bare bone design, to speak in Heideggerian terms. It's like it's the bare bones world that you live in. You're always in one of these worlds. There's no getting out of them. You can move from one to another, but you're always in a world like this. And so this is the world that you're in. You're somewhere, because you have to be somewhere. Now, you might not know where that is, which means that the somewhere that you are is chaotic, in which case you need to go over your past in great detail and figure out where you are. It's like you're lost, right? You're lost, and the problem with being lost is when you're lost, you don't know where to go, and the problem with not knowing where to go is there's a million places that you could go, and a million places is too many places for you to go without dying. So being lost is not good. So you need to know where you are. One of the things that we built online, my partners and I, is this program called Past Authoring that helps people lay out the narrative of their past, to identify, to break their life down into 6 stages, epochs we call them, and then to identify the emotionally significant moments in each epoch and to write them out. What happened negatively, what happened positively, what the consequences were, what you derived from it, perhaps what you could have done differently, perhaps what you learned from it, all of that, so that you can narrow in, zero in on determining precisely where it is that you are right now. And people are often loath to do that because they actually don't want to know, because they'd rather be spread out in a sort of half-blind manner in the fog, hoping that the place that they're at is better than it really is, and deluding themselves by remaining vague, than to figure out, I'm right here, right now, with these specific problems. But it's actually better to do that, because if you have a set of specific problems, and you've really narrowed them down, and really specified them, then you can probably start fixing them, and you can start fixing them in micro ways, bit by bit. But there's no way you can do that without knowing where you are. It's impossible. And you can kind of tell if you don't know where you are. It's quite straightforward. If you are haunted by reveries of the past, for events that are older than approximately 18 months, if they continue to come up in your mind over and over, in your dreams over and over, you haven't extracted the world out from your past experiences. The potential is still trapped in the past. And to confront the potential means to confront the dragon of the past. And of course, that's terrifying, and it can seriously be terrifying. So for example, maybe you're vague and ill-formed and ill-defined because you were abused very badly when you were a child, 4 years old, something like that. And maybe you were abused by a family member, because that's generally who does the abusing. And so that just makes it worse. And then what that means is that you've got you've had an implicit encounter with malevolent evil. No, you've had a direct encounter with malevolent evil, but you have an implicit hypothesis of malevolent evil that's plaguing you. It's still there. It's trapped in the memories, right? It's trapped in the representational structure. And as an adult, you're now faced with the necessity of articulating that fully before you have any chance whatsoever of freeing yourself from it. And so that's no joke. Lots of times people have to go into the past. That's what the psychoanalysts do, and say, look, here something came along and just bloody well knocked me over. And it isn't even that I repressed it, which I think was, well, we won't talk about Freud's errors, because Freud was a genius, so we'll just leave him alone. But sometimes it's not repression, it's just that terrible things happen to people at such a young age that there isn't a bloody chance in hell that they can figure out why they happened or what to do with them, or what they mean. And then you can carry that with you, and you carry it with you. It's like your body encounters the world in stages, and it happens very rapidly. Well, it can extend over years, but the initial stages happen very rapidly. So, for example, if you're walking down the road and you hear a loud noise behind you, you'll go like this. That's a predator defense response, by the way. You crouch down, and that's to stop something from jumping on your back and getting at your neck too easily. That's like a few hundred milliseconds. It's really fast, or even faster than that. And it better be, because something like a snake, we'll say, can nail you just right now, so you better be fast. But it's low resolution. It's like
danger snake, something like that, or danger predatory cat. It's that fast. And then you can unravel that and categorize it, but that takes time. You do that with emotion, and then you do it with cognition, and you can do that with long-term thinking, because maybe you've encountered someone specifically malevolent and predatory at work. That happens to people a lot, who's operating as a destructive bully, and who seems to have no positive function whatsoever, and is only living that out. And then you don't know what to do about it. So you're in prey mode. I don't mean this kind of mode, although that would help too. But I mean, you're acting like a prey animal, and then you have this terribly complex thing to decompose, which is, what the hell's up with this person? Why are they making my life miserable? What is it about me that allows them to make my life miserable? That's a nasty little road to walk down. And you're stuck with having to decompose it. Maybe you can't. Maybe formulating an explicit philosophy of good and evil to deal with something malevolent in your environment actually just happens to be beyond you. And that could easily be. It's certainly the case for people who are young. And it's the case for plenty of adults as well. It's no simple thing to manage. It's something, too, that often soldiers who have post-traumatic stress disorder have to do, because they've encountered terrible things. They've either done them or ran into them, and they need to update their moral model of the world, or they end up in something closely approximating hell. Anyway, so you need to know where you are. That's this, what is. Where are you? So you're navigating. You're a navigator. You're a sailor on an ocean, man. That's what you are. You're a mobile creature. You're going from point A to point B all the time. You're not sitting there glued to a rock like some brainless, sea creature. There's a funny little creature called a hydra. Very simple little creature. In its juvenile stage, it has a brain because it swims around. But then when it turns into an adult, it latches itself to a rock and promptly digests its brain. Because if you're just sitting on a rock and you're not moving, you don't need a brain. But that's not our issue, right? We're zipping around in the world, and so we're navigating agents. And so to navigate, there's two things you need to know. And the first is, where the hell are you? Exactly, precisely, right? Razor sharp. What's good about you and what's bad about you? By your own reckoning. You don't have to. You can ask other people, but this is a game you play yourself. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm taking stock. What is it that's okay about me and what needs some work? And you got to watch to not be too self-critical when you're doing that too, because that can just be another kind of flaw. The other thing about marriage, this is really worth knowing too, is that I learned this in part from reading Jung. It's like, what do you do when you get married? That's easy. You take someone who's just as useless and horrible as you are, and then you shackle yourself to them. And then you say, we're not running away, no matter what happens. Yeah, well, that's perfect, because then you don't get to run away. And the thing is like, if you can run away, you can't tell each other the truth. Because if you tell someone the truth about you and they don't run away, they weren't listening. And so if you don't have someone around that can't run away, then you can't tell them the truth. And so that's part of the purpose of the marriage. It's like, okay, I'll bet on you, you bet on me. It's a losing bet, we both know that. But given our current circumstances, we're unlikely to find anyone better. That's for sure. There are two things that come off of that. One is, people are waiting around to find Mr. or Mrs. Right. It's like, here's something to think about, man, to put yourself on your feet right. If you went to a party and you found Mr. Right, and he looked at you and didn't run away screaming, that would indicate that he wasn't Mr. Right at all. Right? It's like the old Nietzschean joke. If someone loves you, that should immediately disenchant you with them. Right. Or it's the Woody Allen joke. I never belonged to a club that would take me as a member. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. And so you're going to shackle yourself to someone who's just as imperfect as you are. And then the issue is you might be in a situation where you can actually negotiate, because you might think, well, there's some things about you that aren't going so right, and there's some things about me that aren't going so right, and we're bloody well stuck with the consequences for the next 50 years. So we can either straighten this out, or we can suffer through it for the next 5 decades. And people are of the sort that without that degree of seriousness, those problems will not be solved. You'll leave things unnamed, because there's always an out. It's like, and it's the same thing when you're living together with someone. You know that people who live together before they're married are more likely to get divorced, not less likely. And the reason for that is, what exactly are you saying to one another when you live with each other? Just think about it. Well, for now, you're better than anything else I can trick. But I'd like to reserve the right to trade you in. Conveniently, if someone better happens to stumble into me. Well, how could someone not be insulted to their core by an offer like that? Now, they're willing to play along with it because they're going to do the same thing with you. Now, well, that's exactly it. It's like, yeah, I know you're not going to commit to me, so that means you don't value me or our relationship above everything else. But as long as I get to escape if I need to, then I'm willing to put up with that. It's like, that's a hell of a thing. I mean, you might think, how stupid is it to shackle yourself to someone? It's like, it's stupid, man. There's no doubt about that. But compared to the alternatives, it's pretty damn good. Because without that shackling, there are things you will never, ever learn because you'll avoid them. You can always leave. And if you can leave, then you don't have to tell each other the truth. It's as simple as that, because you can just leave. And then you don't have anyone you can tell the truth to.